There we go. Alright, well, I'm hoping that you can see and hear me alright. My name is Tom Mead, and today I'm going to be doing a session on creative writing. It's just going to be a bit of a taster session, just to tell you a little bit about some of my own there we go. Hi guys, can you see and hear me alright? I'm hoping that you can. Please do comment if not. It's 12:03, so I think I'll get started. First of all, I just wanted to say a big thank you to Marie for asking me to be involved in this, and for just for all the hard work that she's done in putting this event together. It's really been a massive undertaking, this huge virtual festival, so big thanks to Marie. And the Rainbows Hospice for children and young people is such a good cause, and they do need our support. So if, like me, you've been watching and enjoying these videos, then please do consider making a donation, because like I say, it is a very worthwhile cause. Right, so I'll get started. First of all, I probably better tell you a little bit about myself just before we get into it, just so that you know who you're dealing with. Like I say, my name's Tom, and I've been writing or trying to write stories for pretty much as long as I can remember. I studied a degree in English and creative writing at the University of Derby, and then when I finished that, I studied a master's degree in humanities, which really just allowed me to, dig a bit deeper into the world of literature and writing. In those days, my focus was on horror fiction and the Gothic, and I wrote a dissertation which included great books like Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Jane Eyre, and things like that. But it was only when I finished the MA that I decided to focus on upping my own creative output. So in the last few years, I've increased the amount of work that I myself am submitting to magazines and publishers, and started getting them printed. So I've written for a number of magazines in the crime fiction genre. In particular, Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine, Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, and also just a few more mainstream literary journals like Lighthouse and Litro. So hopefully that gives you a bit of background on my work and my own particular passion for creative writing. I think now, summer 2020 is probably the best time to be doing a session on creative writing, because now more than ever we all need a creative outlet to let off steam and just to vent our own particular frustrations. It's a perfect means of escapism. If you can just lose yourself in a story for a little while, it can do wonders for your own well-being and mental health. I mean, I've always found creative writing to be a massively therapeutic thing to do, but in the current lockdown situation, it really is a godsend. But the tricky thing about putting together a session like this is that creative writing is very personal. There aren't any one-size-fits-all rules. Oh, I can see from Marie. We can see and hear me. That's lovely. But yeah, with creative writing, there aren't any one-size-fits-all rules that you can apply across the board. Every time somebody tries to impose a kind of structure or an objective, critical approach to creative practice, then some bright spark will come along and break all the rules and become a massive success doing it. I mean, take for example, there's a great book called The Vegetarian by Han Kang, which is a brilliant and very, very dark book, but it breaks a well-established rule of creative writing by having a central character whose perspective or point of view is never related to the reader. We only see her through the eyes of other characters. And while this keeps her at a distance from us, it also causes us to ask questions, and ultimately it makes her all the more vivid as a character. The book itself won the Man Booker International Prize. It's well worth a read. I can heartily recommend it to everybody. And even just to take that point a bit further, even when it comes to basics like grammar and punctuation, there are some writers who just don't follow the rules. I mean, Cormac McCarthy is obviously a famous author. He wrote No Country for Old Men, Blood Meridian. He won a Pulitzer Prize for writing The Road. But if you read his books, you'll find that they use scarcely any punctuation, and it can be a bit intimidating to read. But once you get into it, you really do just get lost in his prose, and it sort of sweeps you along. It makes the novels read like a kind of a stream of consciousness, and it just sweeps you along. There comes a point when you're reading that something just clicks into place and you sort of get it. In a similar vein, it's generally accepted that, for example, run-on sentences are inelegant in creative writing or any sort of writing. But if you get around to reading James Joyce's Ulysses, which is acknowledged as a masterpiece and one of the great novels of the 20th century, it concludes with Molly Bloom's soliloquy, which is a massive 24,000 word section that's broken up only by one comma and two full stops. So talk about an intimidating read. That is right up there. But I suppose the main point I'm trying to make with these examples is that rules are made to be broken when it comes to creative writing, so long as you're able to justify it. That's important, really, that your style and your writing are appropriate for the story that you're trying to tell. And if that's the case, then you can get away with a lot. Martin Amis wrote a novel called Time's Arrow, which tells the story completely back to front. It begins with the main character's death, and it ends with his birth. But when you read this in the context of the actual themes of the narrative, it makes sense. It makes a kind of sense. And again, something clicks as you're reading it, and everything fits into place. Nicholson Baker wrote a book called The Mezzanine, which is a full 200-page novel that takes place entirely in the few seconds that it takes for a man to travel from the ground floor up to the mezzanine on an escalator. So while I personally don't think that there are specific rules that you can apply across the board, I thought I'd give you a bit of a taster of a few creative exercises that I find useful just to help to build up your confidence as a writer and just to get the ideas flowing. One trap that a lot of people fall into is the idea that whatever you're going to write has got to be perfect from the word go, and obviously that's just not the case. It doesn't work like that. And the main thing, the most important thing, is to get the words on the paper at all, and worry about the rest later. Editing is a whole different ball game, and it's something that I will talk about in a little bit. But for the meantime, I'll start with the basics. It's just an exercise for the absolute beginner, but it can be useful for the seasoned pro as well. It's a versatile exercise. It's really just about getting you writing, because one of the most intimidating things can be when you find yourself faced with a blank sheet of paper or a blank screen, and you think, right, what am I going to put there? What's going to go there? So this just takes the anxiety out of the equation altogether, because you're going to be writing non-stop for 5 whole minutes. This is probably best as a pen and paper exercise, just to really help you go with the flow. But you need to set yourself a timer. I personally find that the time limit aspect of the whole thing is very important. The key to creative writing is self-discipline. You have to set yourself a target and you have to stick to it. That's why the 5-minute aspect is central. You're not leaving yourself any room to overthink or to go back and question yourself. You're just plunging in head first, and you don't stop till the 5 minutes are up. You just go with the flow and you see where the words take you. You write anything, write an idea, or a memory, or a story someone told you, or maybe something you saw in the news. Don't necessarily think about what you're writing. It's more just about getting the words on the page, seeing what you can do, and just take it from there. Flex the creative muscles and just find out what you're capable of. When that 5 minutes is up, you take a deep breath, you look back over what you've done, and of course it's not going to be great. I mean, that's not the point of the exercise, but you're going to see something there. You may just be a little line or a little turn of phrase that catches you by surprise, and you think, wow, where did that come from? And it might spark an idea for something else. Now, this exercise is, this free writing exercise is to help you build up your own confidence as a writer, but the most important thing is to show you that it can be done, that you can do it. You're not looking to produce a masterpiece, just to build up a bit of momentum and to propel you into the next stage of your writing. So that's why I'd recommend it to absolute beginners who don't necessarily know what they want to write about, but they just know that they want to write something. So the free writing exercise is a great starting place, but if you still find yourself struggling for subject matter, if you want to write a story but you don't know what about, then there's another thing that I would recommend as an exercise. It's using various creative writing prompts. There are plenty of websites out there for these. There are hundreds actually. So you can find a still image or a single word or maybe a sentence or a fragment of dialogue, and it's a great idea just to have a scroll through some of these and just find out what sorts of ideas they start to stir up for you. It's great because it can lead you off at a really interesting tangent to the point where in the past I've been in situations where different writers are using the same prompt, but they're turning out completely different, unrecognisable finished products. It's all about flexibility. You can mix and match. The prompts might be particularly general, like for instance, write about a character who's travelling somewhere. And you've got to ask questions like, where are they travelling? Why are they travelling there? Who's waiting for them? How are they feeling? Are they nervous? Are they excited? Are they going by bus or by train? Are they driving? Are they cycling? Do they have luggage with them? Maybe they're running away from something. Is it a business trip or is it pleasure? Otherwise, you might want to take a look at a photograph, which is obviously just a single moment captured in time, and try and write a story around it. So, for For instance, there's a famous historical photograph of the so-called Tank Man in Tiananmen Square, standing in front of a tank blocking its path in protest. It's an amazing image, but so little is really known about the image and the man in that photograph. So you can look at it, and I guarantee that stories will start to form in your mind around it. I've got a great book called The Writer's Block, which is a sort of compendium of creative writing prompts, but there are so many that you can access online for free. It's probably your best bet to be going on with if you find yourself short of ideas, and if you're just looking to generate a few ideas and images to be going on with. Another aspect of writing fiction is obviously creating fictional characters, and they need to be believable and credible to the reader, and recognisable as real people. But it's not easy. It's hard to just sort of conjure up a living, breathing character. Now, I know a lot of people who write and who are big fans of people watching, and who will sort of lift mannerisms and maybe a fragment of a conversation from people that they encounter in the street or on public transport, for example. But since we are not really in a position to do that at the moment, then there's another exercise that is a good way to help you build up a fictional character. So if you've got the outline of your character, to really help you get to know them, a good trick is to write a letter, but write a letter from the point of view of your character. But here's the trick. Your character is writing a letter to their younger selves. So think about what your character would want to say to his or her younger self. I mean, would they want to warn them about something? Would they want to reassure them and tell them that everything's going to be okay? This exercise is a great way to just get into the mind of a character and to give you an insight into what it is that makes them tick. I mean, another neat way of going about this is to just have a look around the room that you're in, the room that you are sat in now doing your writing, and you begin writing a description of that room, but write it as though you are your fictional character. What would they make of these surroundings? I mean, would they be impressed? What would catch their eye? Would they be disappointed? Would they be surprised? And really, this is all about just kind of uh, helping you to see the world from a different point of view, to step outside of yourself, and to expand your creative horizons, so to speak. Another great exercise, because one of the most fascinating things about creative writing is that it can subvert the ordinary, and it can change the mundane aspects of life into something really exciting by kind of defamiliarizing it and um, making it seem fresh and new, so that we can look at something that we think we know very well, but see it from a different angle. So this last exercise that I've got, it does require a little bit of imagination, so it's worth spending maybe a couple of minutes thinking about it before putting pen to paper. But the idea is that you will take an ordinary household activity, so like making a cup of tea, or vacuuming, or gardening, and you just try and adopt the viewpoint of somebody who's never seen anything like it before, like an alien. You put yourself in the shoes of someone who's completely new to this activity, and you try and describe it from their point of view. What do they make of it? What do they take it to be? Is it a frightening sight? Is it surprising? And again, this is all just about expanding your viewpoint beyond your own perception of the world and trying to see things from somebody else's point of view. And really, that's one of the most powerful aspects of creative writing. But hopefully, if you have a go at one or two of those exercises, so you've got, first of all, your free writing, just to get the words flowing and just get the ideas bubbling away. You've got a vast array of different prompts, whether it's visual, so a still photograph, or whether it's verbal, if you've got a line of dialogue and you write a story to go around it. That's a great way to generate the ideas and get things going. You've also obviously got the different methods of getting into the shoes of your character. So the idea of your character writing a letter to their younger self, just to help you kind of pin down their motivations and um, their sort of status in the world, and how they perceive things and how they perceive themselves. Um, and then lastly, you've got the defamiliarization exercise, which is a really great thing just to help kind of flex your descriptive muscles and come up with new and exciting ways for talking about ordinary, everyday activities. So hopefully, if you have a go at one or two of those, it will just get the creative juices flowing, and you'll see what you're really capable of as a writer. I mean, essentially, it's about pushing you out of your comfort zone and getting you to ask questions that you wouldn't necessarily think of as yourself. Now, I think there's a tendency to view writing as a sort of spectrum. So at one end, you've got non-fiction with its real-world subject matter, whether it's historical or autobiographical, for example. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got poetry, which is often experimental and shuns kind of conventional modes of expression in favour of the experimental and the heightened imagery and metaphor. And then in the middle, you've got fiction, which can veer from one end of the spectrum to the other. It can be naturalistic, or it can be more experimental and innovative. Truthfully, I think it's a bit more complex than that, and that literary genres aren't so easy to define and categorize. I mean, after all, the non-fiction novel seems like a contradiction in terms. But if you read Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, which is a sort of prototype for the modern true crime genre, it's an account of the author's own experiences investigating a murder case, and it's a grim read, but it is absolutely compelling. But because Capote was never completely transparent about how authentic this account was, we have to question just how much of it's real and how much of it is from his imagination. And at the end of the day, whether that really matters, so long as what we've got is a good book at the end of it. It's becoming increasingly common to merge and blend different genre tropes. And personally, I tend not to worry too much about what form my writing takes, so long as it gets the point or the story across that I want to tell the reader. Now, I'm sure that, like a lot of you, Roald Dahl was a really inspirational part of my childhood. I'm still a big fan of his stories that he wrote for adults. My favourite when I was young was Danny, Champion of the World. But he's also a very insightful figure on the subject of creative writing. There's a piece that he wrote which is called Lucky Break, which I refer to a lot. It's sort of a rundown of his key tips for writing. You can find it online. Lucky Break, it's called. So I would recommend checking that out. But there are one or two quotes from it that stick in my mind. And one is about the importance of self-discipline if you want to write, because the thing is, at the end of the day, the only person that you've got to please is yourself with your writing. He says no one is around to give you the sack if you don't turn up for work, or to tick you off if you start slacking. So what it boils down to is that the only person you've got to keep entertained is you. And if you write something that you would want to read, then that's half the battle. I mean, personally speaking, I like mysteries and thrillers. So that's what I've been writing. And if there's one thing to be learned, it's that you won't get anywhere by trying to write to please other people instead of yourself. It's got to be you first and foremost. I mean, how else are you going to stay motivated enough to see a piece of work through to the finish? And a lot of the time, if you find yourself struggling to get motivated, or if you hit a stumbling block, you get a bit of writer's block, it can be a blessing in disguise, because it causes you to just reassess what it is that you're working on and to start asking difficult questions like, is this the story that I want to tell? Is it working? Have I written myself into a corner? And if you can't answer those questions, then it might be worth heading back to the drawing board. But that's not to say that you won't be able to salvage something from what you've already done. It can be a matter of reshaping the form and structure or the plot, but keeping the language and the descriptions. Or it might be keeping the basic form, but sacrificing some of the words that don't fit. It's This obviously leads on to editing. So I thought I'd take a minute or two just to talk about the editing process. So once you've actually got your work finished in draft form, beginning to end, whether it's a story or a poem, even once you've got it finished beginning to end, the work isn't quite done. What you need to do then is to go through it beginning to end. Try reading it out loud, first of all. So that will help you to notice if there are any awkward turns of phrase or weird sentence structures that you might not have noticed when you're just writing and reading it in your head. And if you feel comfortable enough, I would also recommend getting someone else to read it out loud to you. You'll have the benefit of a brand new perspective on your work from someone who doesn't necessarily know what it was you were going for. So they might place the emphasis somewhere different, and it might just highlight things that you didn't know you'd done. It'll give you a reading that's fresh, and you might pinpoint ideas or sort of little linguistic tricks that you didn't even know were in there. Something that every writer should be wary of is cliches. Now, I'm not saying don't use them, because after all, they have become cliches for a reason. They're simple and they get the point across. But if your writing is loaded with cliches, it's going to make for a pretty tedious read, and it is going to be off-putting to the readers. And often there are other things that you can do, much more effective ways of conjuring up an image or setting a scene. It's just a matter of how you go about sidestepping that cliche. So a good way to approach this is to think about what effect the cliche is trying to achieve. And then you come up with a different phrase to achieve that same effect. So obviously there's the famous cliche saying something is busy, someone is busy as a bee. And obviously you want the image of somebody flitting between different tasks. But how else can you say that without resorting to cliche? It's That's another worthwhile exercise, taking well-known cliches and trying to transform them into something different. Find a different way of achieving that same effect. What a lot of editors say, a common phrase is "kill your darlings." So that means that if you've got a phrase or a section of the work that you're particularly attached to, try taking it out and see if the piece can work without it. See if it can stand on its own 2 feet. If you take away the bit that you're most pleased with, or the bit that you're most determined to include, then that will show whether the piece works as a whole, or whether your darling is the one thing that's holding it together. And if that's the case, then you need to rethink structure. But what's more often the case is that you'll find your piece not only works without your darling, whatever it may be, but that it's more concise and more effective as a whole. And more often than not, you will find that it's a better piece. The hardest part about editing is making cuts. It's because obviously you put blood, sweat, and tears into a piece of writing, and then you're just casting bits of it aside. But it can also be the most satisfying and the most liberating aspect of the whole creative process. And also the best way of improving the quality and the readability of your work. A good rule of thumb for this comes from Stephen King. He wrote a fantastic memoir called On Writing, which is one of my favourite books, which I would really recommend as a sort of toolkit for aspiring creative writers. It's great just to keep it by your side and to refer to if ever you find yourself in difficulty. But when you're talking about short stories, he makes the point that a finished draft is usually the length of the first draft minus about 10%. Now, of course, that's a wholly subjective approach, but it should give you an idea of the importance of being quite ruthless when you're editing. And just cutting out what you don't need so that eventually you're just left with a perfectly formed story. It's been likened in the past to kind of chipping away at a rock until you're left with the finished product. Now, that's pretty much all that I had to say about creative writing. I've given you a few exercises which I would recommend that you have a go at, and I've also just told you a little bit about my own approach and my own understanding. Hopefully this little taster session has given you some food for thought, and even better, hopefully it's got you writing as well. I'm happy to answer any questions about it if you want to send me a message, or obviously you can always just comment below the video and I'll have a look through and do my best to answer them for you. And of course, if you're looking for somebody to read your work or give you a bit of feedback, you can always send it to me. I'm always more than happy to read work. I suppose the main thing that I want you to take away from this session is that the only way to become a writer is by writing. Write everywhere, all the time. It's a skill that you can hone with practice. And nobody's perfect when they first set out, but if you write simply and honestly and don't overcomplicate things, then the readers will find you. It's as simple as that. Lastly, I'd just like to say once again a big thank you to Marie for asking me to be involved in this amazing virtual festival that she's put together. And the Casting Rainbows event is all in the name of a really good cause, the Rainbows Hospice for children and young people. So please do consider a donation. Thank you very much for watching. And like I say, any questions, please do send me a message. Thank you very much.